Top of the hour, let's begin with the updates. US President Donald Trump truly deserves a Nobel Peace Prize because, if anything, his frequent tantrums and tariff threats have now managed to bring together countries who would have not been on the same side, on the same page just weeks ago. India and China that we are talking about. Now, the ambassador of India, who has now taken a jibe at the US President Donald Trump after his tariff imposition on various countries, including India. With the text, he also added a post quoting a excerpt from talks between Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Celso Amorim, the chief advisor to Brazilian President Lula. Now, the post says, and I quote, that using tariffs as a weapon to suppress other countries violates the UN Charter, undermines the WTO rules, and it is both unpopular and unsustainable. Let's get you as far as details that are now coming in, because the trade tensions, however, continue to simmer. And this question that was asked to Donald Trump of possible negotiations, however, the US president seems to be hardening his stance. The tariff stands further as Trump says that negotiations that has been taking place, but when it comes to saying that not until all things are resolved, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi made a big statement, says that he is ready to pay the price on a personal account, but nothing can come in the way when it comes to national interest, when it comes to farmer interest, when it comes to the interests of its own people, there would be no compromise.
Mr. President, just to follow up on the India tariffs, do you expect increased trade negotiations, since you've announced the 50% tariff?
No, not until we get it resolved.
Mr. President, just to follow up on the India tariffs, do you expect increased trade negotiations, since you've announced the 50% tariff?
No, not until we get it resolved.
Mr. President, just to follow up on the India tariffs, do you expect increased trade negotiations, since you've announced the 50% tariff?
No, not until we get it resolved.
Mr. President, just to follow up on the India tariffs, do you expect increased trade negotiations, since you've announced the 50% tariff?
No, not until we get it resolved.
Mr. President.
But where Donald Trump has been putting the onus of India when it comes to funding a war machine like Russia, however, when it comes to the tariff tensions, are they on taking place as far as the possible ending of the war scenario? However, Donald Trump has now put the ball in the court of the Russian president. He says it is up to Putin now. However, Trump hints at a no India breakthrough. He says, will tariffs lift off in case of peace? However, Donald Trump remains non-committal on that aspect. We'll talk about that later. That is what Donald Trump's statement is. However, he continues to maintain that India will have to pay 50% tariff, but he has now skipped the question when asked of a possible query of a rollback if the war between Ukraine and Russia ends.
Deadline for Vladimir Putin agreeing to a ceasefire still stand tomorrow? Is that fluid now that talks are...
What?
Is your deadline still standing for Vladimir Putin to agree to a ceasefire tomorrow, or is that fluid now?
It's going to be up to him. We're going to see what he has to say. It's going to be up to him. Very disappointed, yeah.
So he is indicating is that the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now what is being said that it is expected that the two leaders may likely face each other. They will be holding a meeting. What is being said that it may likely happen next week. However, when it comes to the U.S. Special Envoy was in Russia, he met President Putin, and all of that now being laid out, especially when it comes to the recent strain in relations between United States and Russia, but it seems that India is now paying the price as far as when it comes to its purchase of goods and Russian oil is now concerned. Let's get in a word from Srinjoy. Srinjoy, good morning. So basically, if we talk about this is a strain in relationships between United States and Russia, but India is getting in the way according to President Trump. However, as this very unlikely scenario that we are looking at, it has actually brought India and China closer.
The most important thing to remember is that whatever China has said in recent times is keeping in mind the fact that Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be in China in a few weeks. And that is not for anything else. It is for the Shanghai Cooperation Summit meeting. And it's quite natural that Prime Minister will go there because India is part of SCO. Now, when a meeting like that happens, then naturally there will be what you would call a bilateral. So bilaterals are bound to happen when someone is in that country. Like, for instance, when Prime Minister was in Brazil for BRICS, he had a bilateral with President Lula. Similarly, when he's in China, he will have a bilateral, most probably with Xi Jinping. There's no doubt about that. Now, keeping that in mind, and the fact that the Chinese are opportunistic, they see an advantage where they can, and President Trump is giving them not this but many advantages. They are playing up this issue, and it's very clear that Global Times is doing this, keeping in mind Prime Minister's visit and the recent disarray that President Trump has caused. Now, that is absolutely clear. As far as this business with America and Russia, now, if there is a result from this, meaning a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, then it would be a really helpful thing. And this is something the world is looking forward to, even India, because India has had to pay the price for this war. It means higher fuel prices, higher fertilizer prices, higher prices of food grades, lots of problems for a country as large as India.
But he still remains uncommittal as far as when it non-committal rather, as far as when asked the question, if the war ends, if there is a ceasefire then or a truce that has been reached between Ukraine and Russia, does it mean that tariffs that has been imposed on India, will he withdraw the same? However, he doesn't seem to mention on a possible rollback either. Srinjoy continues to be with us because, as he mentioned, the mention of President Lula is also significant because he also had a conversation with Prime Minister Modi, reaffirming his commitment to deepen India-Brazil strategic partnership. Now, in a post on X, the Prime Minister has thanked President Lula for making his visit to Brazil as a memorable and a meaningful one. The Prime Minister said that the strong partnership between Global South nations benefits everyone. And it is indeed beneficial in times like these when Donald Trump is out to tariff everyone. A thread that ties Brazil, India, Russia and China. In fact, Brazil and India both are at par at 50% tariff threat. That was announced by President Trump. And Lula had just days ago said that he would rather call Modi than dial Trump for trade negotiations.
भारत अपने किसानों के, पशुपालकों के और मछुआरे भाई बहनों के हितों के साथ समझौता नहीं करेगा.
Why are you singling India out for these additional sanctions?
It's only been 8 hours. You're going to see a lot more. You're going to see so much secondary sanctions. Yes, ma'am.
और मैं जानता हूं व्यक्तिगत रूप से मुझे बहुत बड़ी कीमत चुकानी पड़ेगी, लेकिन मैं इसके लिए तैयार हूं.
भारतीय जनता पार्टी को ये बात 10 साल पहले सोचना था कि हमें अपने किसानों के हित के लिए हमेशा चिंतित रहना चाहिए और प्राथमिकता पर हमें अपने हर सेक्टर का ध्यान रखना है.
It is, I think, known that President Trump uses drama and uses said raising the ante as a negotiating tactic.
माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी वो ट्रंप के सामने नतमस्तक हो गए, लगातार चुप्पी साधे आज पहली बार बोले, जबकि अमेरिकी राष्ट्रपति डोनाल्ड ट्रंप भारत को इकोनॉमिकली ब्लैकमेल कर रहा है.
We did it with India. We're doing it probably with a couple of others. One of them could be China.
We have got a very special relationship, a long relationship, and we highly value our strategic partnership. We are very excited and delighted to learn about the visit of His Excellency the President of Russia, President Putin, to India.
So as far as this conversation is concerned between the President of Brazil and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, this is what the Prime Minister had put out post the conversation. He says, and I quote, "Had a good conversation with President Lula, thanked him for making my visit to Brazil a memorable and a meaningful one. We are committed to deepening our strategic partnership, including trade, energy, tech, defense, health, and more. A strong people-centric partnership between Global South nations benefits everyone." This is coming at a time when the Prime Minister was present there in Brazil for the BRICS summit. But in the meantime, when we talk about this call that came after Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first response to the US President's 50% additional tariff warning to India, undeterred and unfazed, India has made it clear there will be no compromise over the interests of farmers, our fishermen and our livestock rearers. In fact, in a strong expression of commitment, Prime Minister said that he knows that he might have to personally pay a heavy price for it, but he's ready for that. Now, this resolve may soon come handy because Donald Trump has said that there might be more in the offing in form of secondary sanctions. That is something that he is not ruled out yet. But talks are on, negotiations are on, remains to be seen exactly what's in store for India. Let's in the meantime introduce, joining us live is American economist Douglas Holtz-Eakin. Thank you very much, Douglas, for taking out your time here and speaking to us. Of course, this is a situation which is volatile, but these are interesting times for Indo-American ties with President Trump now raising tariff on Indian exports to 50%. How do you read this escalation?
Well, the general proposition of imposing tariffs, which now amount to roughly $350 billion American dollars at an annual rate, I think is a big policy mistake for the Trump administration. It's something that in the end will lead to higher prices in the United States, and we've had inflation problems, so it'll lead to slower growth, and the labor market's quite weak at the moment. And it will, in fact, isolate the United States in the global trading alliances. So I'm not a big supporter of this particular policy. The specifics of the India tariff are, in fact, even more puzzling. He's levying these tariffs using authorities granted to him by Congress under something known as the International Economic Emergency Powers Act. That says nothing about foreign policy objectives like the Russian war in Ukraine or changing the flow of oil in the global economy. So the particular signaling out India using those powers is troubling, to say the least. And the fact that others, like China notably, are exempted from the same kind of treatment is not something you can defend very easily. So we're at a very odd point in American economic policy history. This is not traditional business by any means, and it's now drifted far away from the economic intent and into foreign policy.
But Douglas, do you think that, these decisions will stand judicial scrutiny, or are these purely executive decisions that the judiciary cannot interfere with?
Not all of the tariffs are the same. There are some tariffs which are levied in the name of national security. These are the steel, aluminum, copper, automobile tariffs. Those will withstand judicial scrutiny. Those have been used before. There are others which are levied on, for example, China after an investigation into their trading practices. Those will survive judicial scrutiny. The remainder, the so-called universal tariff or reciprocal tariffs, in particular the ones levied on India, have already been ruled against in the lower courts of the United States. The appeals court heard that case a couple of days ago and will render a decision in the near future. Most people accept it to uphold the initial decision that these are not legally levied, and it will then be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. So I think there's a very good chance that these particular tariffs will fall under judicial scrutiny, and the president will have to be forced to try something different.
All right, because you mentioned China, we're going to talk about that. I request you to stay on with us because when we speak of two unlikely nations, of course they are neighbors, but coming together on the same page, that is something possibly Donald Trump may not intend to do, but actually has done it. India finding an unlikely ally in China. As China's Mapmi seems to be batting for ties, as Global Times has now hailed India's ties and citing Hindu proverb in the op-ed on the ties article that bats for better Indo-China ties, and India has now been referred as a brother. Now, as far as has been calling it, that it is a new era of dragon-elephant tango call, and amid Donald Trump tariff tantrums, India seems to be finding an unlikely ally. Now, if we mention China, of course, it is important. The upcoming SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation, the summit that is going to happen, that is going to be participated as far as Prime Minister Narendra Modi is concerned. And here it seems to an article that seems to be batting for better Indo-China ties and calls for a dragon-elephant tango. Now, this is coming at a time where there is a likely one-on-one or a bilateral that may happen between the leadership of both China and India. And this is the first time that the Prime Minister would be traveling to China post the Galwan clashes. However, when we speak of the leadership and the China issue as well, China being one of the main adversaries of the United States is concerned, right after announcing a steep hike on tariffs against China. However, there was a 90-day pause that was agreed, but this kind of leniency that has not been shown for India. And this is a question that India has been raising, especially pointing out to the hypocrisy and the double standards of the United States of America, saying that there are other countries as well who continue to buy Russian oil and energy. However, when it comes to such kind of allegations that are not leveled on those countries, so is why India being targeted and being singled out, as India in a strongly worded statement has called the tariff hike and an unspecified penalty as unjustifiable, unreasonable and unsubstantiated. Let's in the meantime take a look how China seems to be now describing its relations with India as concerned in this article there, where the Global Times has tweeted an editorial writing that the recent warming of China ties clearly shows that Washington's attempt to draw New Delhi into its so-called Indo-Pacific strategy to contain China does not align with India's independent foreign policy. As a Hindu proverb goes, help your brother's boat across and your own will reach the shore. A healthy China-India relationship brings positive spillover effects to the region and to the world, as we welcome Prime Minister Modi to China with genuine intentions to improve bilateral ties and a pragmatic cooperation plans, and jointly usher in a new chapter of the dragon and the elephant dancing together. Well, that has been as far as global ties are now concerned, talking about the upcoming visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to China. But Douglas, as you mentioned, China, both China and the EU continue to import fossil fuels and other material from Russia as well, and that too in feasible quantities. And yet, Donald Trump is treating them with kid gloves while going on a full stretch to target India. Why do you think that?
It's not easy to explain. He has a long-standing public animus toward the EU, and so for him to treat the EU with especially a soft treatment is out of character and not easily defensible. The China relationship is one where both parties in the United States for quite a while now have been quite unhappy with China, trying to figure out the best way to get China to act in a sort of acceptable fashion on the international stage has been really difficult. And so they're trying different tactics all the time. I can't really explain Europe, and China is just a work in progress.
So, however, as far as will this prove to be a bigger challenge there for the United States if it means, being isolated from the world order? Is this the change in the new global axis, whether it's Russia, China and India? What happens to the United States in such a scenario then? Douglas, thank you very much for joining in. Appreciate your point of view. Of course, when we speak of India is preparing for all eventualities. It is rallying support with Russia and China. The NSA, Ajit Doval, who already is in Moscow, he announced that President Putin will also soon be visiting India. Now, Prime Minister Modi is likely to visit China for the upcoming SCO summit at the end of this month, where he is also expected to hold bilateral meeting with the Chinese President Xi Jinping.